So I'm going to welcome on stage, with no further ado, Charis from Hyatt, Chris, my partner in crime, Ollie from Accor, and Michael from GCP Hospitality. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Eileen. My name is Chris Legaspi. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Archipeligo International. Welcome once again, everybody. Today's panel cuts across what I think is the hardest challenge in hotel commercial strategy: alignment. Sales, marketing, revenue often sit in the same org chart, but doesn't mean they move as one. Different KPIs, different tools, different ways of thinking. This session is about closing that gap. You'll hear from leaders who's built real synergy, not by theory, but by fixing structure, changing culture and aligning people around one goal. Let's get straight into it, okay? Can everybody introduce themselves first? Let's start with Charis.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Charis. I am based in Singapore at the Hyatt corporate office. I look after our sales and marketing function or I still say sales and marketing commercial function in Southeast Asia. So it's good to be here today. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Charis. A round of applause, please. Next, let's call it Ollie.
Thank you, Chris. I'm Ollie, based in Bangkok in the Accor regional office, overseeing commercial for Asia. So everything from India through to Japan.
Thank you. A round of applause for Ollie, please. Next, we have Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a husband, dad, hockey player. In my spare time, my side hustle is VP Commercial Strategy at GCP Hospitality. We're managing about 35 properties globally, with most of them here in Asia Pac.
Thank you very much, Michael. A round of applause, please. Now, first question. This would be for Ollie. How is your commercial structure set up? Who owns what? And how do you avoid stepping on each other?
If I may give a perspective from two lenses, the first at a hotel level and then the second at a regional level. So if I may start with the hotel level, like many hotels and hotel groups, we have evolved from the traditional Director of Sales and Marketing role, leading the commercial function, and have really split those disciplines into the competencies that are required for each of those. So sales, marketing, and revenue as three separate disciplines. And in some cases, all of those reporting through to the general manager, with the GM having oversight on the commercial strategy. But we understand in more complex operations that is not sustainable, mainly for the sanity of the general manager. So in those cases, we have layered a commercial director or a commercial general manager in some cases to lead that strategy with one lens across those three disciplines. But what's been really important is that we've separated those disciplines because the competencies required for sales and marketing, of course, are vastly different, and we need the expertise in each function. And then from the second lens, from a regional perspective, Accor has evolved our regional structure in the last 5 years and layered a commercial director structure, which really gives one single touch point for the hotels in driving commercial strategy and commercial performance. Of course, they are supported by functional experts across revenue management, marketing, digital, but there's a single point of contact for the hotels, which has really helped to elevate consistency and drive alignment across the hotel operation and then, of course, across the portfolio.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ollie. Charis, may I ask you, related to what Ollie just mentioned earlier, an additional, basically, for your group, how is it set up?
It's quite interesting to actually hear like what Ollie said, right? So it's actually very, very similar, right? Across in our group as well. But we didn't change the name. So for example, for me, it's just as RVP, sales and marketing. But everyone knows that my function is that one point contact, like what Ollie is saying, right? So I think what is different is at Hyatt, really, our purpose of we care for people so that they can be their best really has to manifest in all levels, right? So when we talk about this, care for who, it's not just the customer, it's also the key stakeholders, the owners, the team member. So in commercial service or in sales and marketing in our organization. It's sales, it's marketing, digital, loyalty, distribution, revenue, event, digital. So it's all that, right? So everyone is quite clear on what is their core responsibility and what is their supporting role, right?
Okay.
And it's really in uniting all these functions to make sure that we really drive that commercial success with, optimizing resources.
Okay.
It's a synergy, really emphasizing on the synergy and also cross-functional collaboration, right? And developing our team, because, it's one thing to say that we want everyone to think holistically, but it's another thing to make sure everyone can think holistically and not revenue thinking revenue, sales thinking sales, right? So I think that's really the mindset change that we really are trying to really drive for the last few years.
Okay, just to be clear, for your group, was there a change of so-called title already to commercial, or you didn't change at all in terms of that?
So it's a bit of a mix in our group, to be honest. So for example, we have a senior VP commercial services, right? So that has changed, right? But let's say for me, my title says sales and marketing. So I think maybe we are not so how should I say, focus on what the title say, but
Okay.
everyone is very clear on the function of all these people. So in our hotel level, for example, our team is still called EAM, Sales and Marketing, Director of Sales and Marketing. We do have 1 or 2 hotels who has like a customer function. So then you have a customer director of commercial service, but small number in that.
Thank you. Ollie, in your case, was there actually something to be fixed? That's why it was changed, or it was just a simple change?
It was responding to the evolution of the industry. So in a more traditional environment, 10, 15 years ago, a director of sales and marketing was perfectly suitable. But with increased digitalization of every single segment, we needed to really separate the disciplines to ensure that we had the right competencies leading that function. So it wasn't wrong, but I would say it was wrong for the times.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now let's go to Michael. Michael, are we training teams to think commercially? Since we heard from Ollie, we heard from Charis, are we training teams to think commercially or still in silos right now? What do you think about this? What does real upskilling look like across sales, marketing, and revenue?
Great question. I think the word silo is a bit of a misnomer in hospitality. I think we have to realize that our teams will continue to work in silos because, as Ollie pointed out, there's such a level of specialization and level of expertise in every discipline that we can't expect anymore our commercial leaders to be generalists. We need to have experts in digital marketing. We need to have experts in revenue management. We need to have experts in sales. So fundamentally, we are expecting our commercial members, team members, to be functional leaders in their own sphere. Now, what we need to focus on, however, is what we're doing is T-shaped training. So developing very deep understanding of a specialization or a field, be it digital marketing or revenue or distribution, but then making sure that they have a broad understanding of the other function. That's what's fundamental.
Okay.
And I think if I compare to 10, 15, 20 years ago, a lot of our commercial leaders used to come from operation and hotels. This is no longer the case. A lot of our newest hire in revenue management and sales and marketing are coming from either other industries or straight from university. So we also need to think about how do we bring them into understanding hospitality as well. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of recognizing that silos are there to stay, and we just need to be better at facilitating communication and collaboration.
Thanks very much, Michael. Charis, in your case, siloed approach, training, what can you say about this?
It's wonderful to hear what Michael just said, actually. And I do agree that sometimes we look at things in like quite literal, right? It is definitely that functional expertise that needs to happen because cannot everyone just know a bit of everything, right? So at Hyatt, I think one thing that we really are focusing on in the last couple of years, there's this framework that we have, the Hyatt way of working, right?
Okay.
So what does that mean, right? So in the Hyatt way of working, we focus on really some key elements, but one of the most important thing is it is an outcome-driven approach. Right? So it's not looking at just KPI, it's not just looking at, what are the outputs. So, the outcome-driven approach means that, okay, as a team, what is it that we're trying to achieve? So that's number one, right? But importantly, what are some of the measurements that we should focus on? And not all measurements, but measurements that matters to that outcome, right? So that approach then, that really has to be cross-functional collaboration. You cannot work in silo. You do have the expertise, but you cannot work in silo. And, we also really emphasize on test and learn. So if we want to make sure everything is perfect before we roll it out, then I think, you are really not going to have enough time to do that. So that test and learn environment or that approach is critically important for our leaders in sales and marketing. So with that, in the last 2-3 months, we actually roll out a series of roadshows, right? And it's a commercial strategist roadshow. So what do we focus on those roadshows? Really, it's a platform. It's an in-person meeting. We have leaders across all functions in sales and in commercial service to attend. And it is a roadshow. It's 4 days, right? We really talk about you have sections that is deep in expertise, like you said, but there's a lot of broad, strategy discussions, people understanding, each other, based on empathy, so that we understand when the revenue managers say, no, this is not what we should do. The sales doesn't get, but why, right? They need to understand because of the outcome that we're trying to achieve. So I think, with that roadshow, we really see that a lot of, a great result with that. I think it's that kind of mindset change that we need people to have. The second thing that we have done is also that this year we rolled out what we call Hyatt University. So it's Hyatt University. So it's an online platform that hosts all the resources, right, that we have for the team on a self-paced training, right? So if I am a digital person, I should know about a sales function. I should know about how sales work. I should know about how Marcom work. I should know about how revenue work, and vice versa. So we have that, rolled out at the beginning of the year, and really our aim is to develop our talent so that they can be as holistic as possible in their mindset while they have that functional expertise, right? So that's the two key examples that we have recently done.
Thank you very much. By the way, may I remind everybody that you can send in questions. I can read your questions. So please do send questions if you have, so that our panelists can address all of the questions shortly. Okay? Thank you very much for that, Charis. Now, we've talked about so far clarifications of structure. Then we went to training and people. Let's go now to mind and culture. Ollie, let's start with Ollie this time. What mindset gets in the way of commercial synergy?
I think Michael's just touched on it, and it's the topic of silos, because I don't think we can talk about this without acknowledging the legacy silos that do exist and the silos that will continue to exist based on the functional expertise that's required. So I think it's a little bit ignorant to say let's eliminate silos, because they are required based on the specificities of the role. But I think the legacy silos are the topic we really need to talk about, because they are the silos of that's your department, that's your account, that's your booking that you're responsible for. So that's really the culture piece that we need to break down, and then identify where silos are required to drive discipline, and then importantly where the synergies are. So I think a really tangible example is the digitalization of the leisure segment. So it's no longer purely managed by sales, but it's a distribution channel. Therefore, that requires collaboration between revenue and sales. So there are distinct responsibilities, of course, for each individual, but they are both responsible for driving that segment. So I think, acknowledging and eliminating the legacy silos, and then finding the commonalities and the collaboration that's required.
Thank you very much for that, Ollie. Now, Michael, sorry. In addition to this, let me add more spice to this question. How about ego? Okay, ego. And how about legacy habits? What do you see most, in this particular question that affects the synergy?
I think there's a generational distinction, and I see that in some of our commercial leaders that have been with hotels for 20, 25 years, sometimes with the same hotels. They've been in the leisure segment for many, many years. They've been managing the same accounts for many, many years. And now all of a sudden you need to tell them, well, that's no longer your account. It's now under revenue and distribution because we're putting them on dynamic pricing. So there is it's not an ego shift or an ego issue. I think it's a leadership issue. How do you actually bring up this conversation? How do you retrain? And these people still have a place in the organization. But I think 5 or 10 years ago, there was this big push of shifting leisure on dynamic pricing. And it felt a little bit like pulling the plug very suddenly for a lot of leisure salespeople. And I think that was probably a mistake for a lot of commercial leaders, is we tried to do that very rapidly without really thinking about what are we going to do with our leisure salespeople. They still have a lot of value, they still have a lot of connection, a lot of experience, and we basically said, well, hotel beds is no longer your account because now it's connected, or all of these accounts moved to dynamic pricing. So I think it was more of a leadership issue that we didn't take the time to think about the people and what we would do post-distribution era. And I think that's still a little bit of a problem, and we're seeing that in a lot of hotels that are still trying to balance that traditional wholesale and distribution. I don't think it's an ego problem. I think it's the leaders that aren't necessarily explaining well enough what is the place of leisure sales, because that's probably the most prominent that comes to mind.
Agreed. Transformation management, change management is the key, right? Charis.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, and it's very interesting that you asked this question about ego, because I think that really has to do with a lot of what is the company culture as well, right? So let's say Hyatt, okay, when we say that, we care for people, because that part, the empathy part, plays like a significant role in our organization. So it's not like, so it becomes a little bit easier. It's never like easy, right? But relatively, it's a little bit easier because then people already have this kind of like mindset about, empathy and understanding a broader function more than what it's just them, right? And with that, it helps with the transition. And I think we also need to, at the corporate level, I think we also need to be very mindful. Who doesn't want to have more dynamic and not static wholesale? I think like no one will say, no, we want static wholesale. But there is a place and a time for everything. Yes. And I think we do need to recognize that like nothing is just bad. I mean, the bad things can be good sometimes, and the good things can be bad sometimes. So I think it's just having that fluid, mindset and understanding that, it goes back to what I was saying, right, about the outcome. So it's not one thing that we're not measuring one thing at a time. Like we cannot look at measurements, we cannot look at team contributions in silos. So everything needs to be looked at in a holistic manner, and I think that helps. Because if everyone knows that, okay, my contribution may be slightly different at this time of the year versus another time, then they don't have to feel insecure, right? And we really encourage this kind of mindset in our organization, and I think that helps.
Excellent. Yes, so change management, transformation management, and relationship management, not only outside, but also internal, right? Because sometimes we forget this and we lose these valuable employees or associates of ours, and of course, we lose them to some other very good friendly competitors somewhere else. Now, very good. You touched on the topic of KPI. And let me throw this question to Ollie. Metrics. Who owns RevPAR in your setup? When performance drops, who gets held accountable now?
I think all too often, the buck stops with the revenue manager. And that is not correct, because RevPAR is the responsibility of every individual in the hotel. I think...
Agree, right, everybody?
That's all the revenue managers clapping, I see.
It's about time, they said.
Exactly. If the buck stops with anybody, it's the general manager, because it is a key KPI for the hotel. But I think it's important that each function understands how they contribute to that KPI. Because if something is everybody's, it's also nobody's. So that's where it's really important to have supporting KPIs that you can link back to RevPAR or another umbrella KPI, I would say.
Yep.
So how sales contribute to RevPAR, how marketing contribute to RevPAR, and of course how revenue contribute to RevPAR. But let's not just think about commercial team members, because operations also contribute to RevPAR.
Oh, definitely, definitely. A round of applause, please.
So
It's
I
not
think
only
it's,
commercial. Yeah, I think they forget this sometimes,
Yeah,
right?
but again, to that point, I think it's important that we have supporting KPIs for those departments, and they can really understand how that is influencing RevPAR or another umbrella KPI.
Yes, I think it's, again, just like what Charis said earlier, and Michael, it's leadership. Yeah? So, good, thank you. Michael, what can you say about this question in particular? Metrics, who owns RevPAR in your perspective?
I mean, the commercial team at large is responsible for RevPAR, but I think a bigger question is whether RevPAR is the most important KPI that we need to focus on, and I think there's a trend and to look more at GoPAR and GoPAR index. So what we're moving all of our hotels is to look at hot stats more than STR, and I don't know if either of them are here in the room, but looking at GoPAR index is probably where we're going to shift a lot of our attention. Then, however, to Ollie's point, is about the linkage between each individual specialist, what their KPI and how their KPI influences GoPAR or how it influences RevPAR. So if your front office team has got a upselling target and an upselling KPI, link that to your GoPAR, link that to your RevPAR so that they understand. Same thing with your marketing. What is the link between their ROAS or the revenue on ad spend on the GoPAR index, and then trying to explain, well, here's the campaign that you made, you did a great job on your KPI, and this is why our GoPAR index is improving.
Yes.
Or vice versa, what can we do differently? So I think that linkage is more important than everyone focusing on a single metric, because again, as we've been talking about, everyone has their own specialty, and there's not necessarily, other than, again, RevPAR, GoPAR, profitability, you know, those really big overarching metric, there's not a single metric that will actually capture the work and the contribution that everyone has to make, but it's about the linkage between their individual KPI and how that actually impacts GoPAR index and RGI.
Agree. Now, as leaders, brings us to this other topic now, KPI. As leaders, have you changed, was there any occasion you had to change KPIs of the team, whether primary or secondary KPIs, because it was driving the wrong behavior?
Many times.
Okay.
I mean, sales, I think, is one where it's very easy to miss budget. And then you realize that either the KPIs that you've set for your sales team are unachievable or they're just too easy. So you have to either move the bar and change midway. But I think there's this always constant balancing act between individual and team KPI as well, which is a little bit of a struggle, or the fact that sales team is heavily incentivized on their own account production, whereas revenue and distribution are not as often recognized and incentivized for the contribution of direct channels or booking.com. So I think there's still a little bit of learning that needs to be done. I know that there's other sessions later. I think Anders is talking about different KPIs later as well. So it will be interesting how this continues to evolve, but I still think that we haven't gotten it right when it comes to balancing individual to team. It's still difficult.
Thank you very much. Charis, what can you say?
I was like smiling while Michael was talking, and I feel so happy that, okay, it's kind of like an endorsement that, okay, you're on the right track, right? so you know, the roadshow that I was mentioning earlier, actually we call that roadshow demand generation and profit optimization. So really, we do not want our commercial team just think about the top, right? I mean, obviously, our responsibility is to drive the top, but there's many ways to reach that same number, right? So how do we look at this in a holistic and very fluid manner, right? And because as I look at the Southeast Asia, it's 8 different markets, very different. Singapore is very different than Bali. So you cannot just say, okay, this is what we want to drive. We just want direct. Maybe not. It depends, right?
Yes.
So I think that's critically important. And to the KPI question, right? If everyone is, I mean, obviously everyone has to have some primary KPI because that's how we drive the team. But if they really only just look at their primary KPI, it ain't going to work, right? Because whether we like it or not, there are times these KPIs are in conflict with each other. Yes. We don't talk enough about this, right? Yes. As if like everything's working in parallel, but it doesn't. So the same question, like who doesn't want to have more direct? I mean, no one will say we don't want to have more direct, but if the team is just driving direct in the wrong manner, it could be a bad thing. Yes. So I think, that goes back to what I was earlier saying that, about the outcome-driven organization. Because if everyone has that outcome as a North Star, then everything else, all the decision just become a little bit easier. Yes. Because then you understand, what does that mean for me to do things differently to achieve that outcome, right? So I think that having that North Star, it's important for us, right? And that's why I say demand generation and profit optimization. Yes. So your role in commercial, it's also profit optimized.
Definitely. Right? Speaking of profit optimization and what you mentioned earlier in GoPar, one of the things, and changing KPIs, one of the things that I always seem to see is that regardless if the revenues are down, because the KPI is to spend on advertising, they would spend heavily because that's their KPI, regardless if GOP goes down to, 10%. So these are some flexibilities that we need to look at and changing of KPI in my point of view. Thank you very much. Now, Ollie, I have a different question now for you. Tech and tools. I think this is one of your favorites. Okay. Are your tools helping drive alignment or just adding noise? What systems actually support the commercial team in your perspective or in your group?
Historically, I think there has been some confusion with tools and systems that we have tried to implement in our hotels, and they're not always complementary. Sometimes they do compete, and sometimes give potentially different outcomes. Where we've seen really great progress is the implementation of ideas across the group, because that's really elevated the competency and the ability of our RMs to
Sorry,
optimize.
Ollie, just to clarify, you're pertaining to the ideas, not an idea, right?
Ideas.
Okay,
system,
very
yes,
good.
Yes. And it's not a sponsored session. But it has truly transformed the way that our RMs interact with the other commercial teams, because it's a far superior RMS than what we were previously using in the region. So that's really been a game changer, I would say, for the collaboration within the hotel team.
Got it. Thank you very much. Michael, systems.
Where to start, where to end? I think one of the most fundamental system that's been a game changer for us is our BI tools, or Avalon, which we've rolled out across all the properties. Is just having visibility over everything, and sales can have access to visibility over their accounts. They can see their group pipeline. Revenue and distribution can see their channel production. So the BI sphere is probably the most important right now. Sales CRM are also quite critical because they link from revenue, marketing, and operation. RMS as well, very important, whether it's Duetto in some of our properties or Ideas in others, because we work with Hyatt, Accor, and other brands. But I think one of the things that is critical for us is the integration between systems. And I think, again, for quite some times, we've been trying to get best in class in every silo, in every system, and we forgot about the integration and the communication between one system to another. So that's basically where we're now starting to scale back. And we're basically starting to make hard decisions about maybe not getting best in class in every silo or every department, but making sure that we have best integration, that the data flows from one system to another. I think that's more critical. And then the other aspect is the low-tech part of commercial strategy. The good old coffee machine and cooler conversations, trying to get your teams in the same space, especially now with Zoom and the digital meetings and so on. I think that's even more critical. So having these roadshows with Hyatt or having huddles, I mean, we have market sessions with Accor. So that's really important. Getting your marketing, distribution, digital marketing revenue in the same room, whether it's at hotel level or corporate level, is absolutely critical. And I think that low tech, face-to-face is really, really critical, especially in a business like hospitality, where it's, people focus.
Thank you. And Charis, related to that?
Yes.
Related to that?
Sorry, can I add one thing before you ask the next thing?
Sure.
And it's so important that, we have all these BIs and systems, and not everyone is good at systems, right? So you cannot just expect they have access to, but you cannot expect everyone has the same understanding. So at Hyatt, what we also do, it's also that, we have dashboards, right? So you know what you want the team to look at. So we have dashboards. So easy for, if I'm a salesperson, I don't need to log into Hosted or whatever, but I know I can have this dashboard to look at what I'm supposed to be focusing on. So I think that's also a way to help everyone, to bring everyone to the more similar level.
Focus, right?
Yes.
Very good, very good. Thank you very much. Yes, the important thing is focus, because it's really very hard to drive a very large team if we don't know where to guide them to focus to look at, right? Now, unfortunately, we don't have too much time. So, and it was a very exciting panel talking to you guys here. My last question for everybody. If alignment is the goal, what's the non-negotiable that makes it work? Each of you, please. Ollie.
If I can just pick up on what Michael was saying, I think it's that low-tech interaction. And I think the best way to assess how well a commercial team works together is to join a RevMax meeting. Because you can really see the collaboration, where there may be unnecessary silos, and where they're finding the link and helping each other achieve their common KPIs. So that would be the must-have for me.
Thank you very much. Charis.
Very, very similar. I think alignment really is effective communication, right? So we want to bring everyone to the same level and understanding the same outcome that we're trying to achieve. So interestingly, Ollie talked about RevMax. I mean, we even changed the name of this meeting to Business Optimization Meeting, right? So it's our new thing called BOM. Okay, so we're getting a hang of it. But in the same manner, we also bring the operation teams in. So we are changing that kind of the whole flow of decision making in our organization.
Thank you very much. Michael.
Just echoing what Ollie is saying, one of the things we've started doing is with AI now, you can record all of your meetings and minutes, and because a lot of our RevMax or power-ups or commercial meetings are remote, we're actually now, I'm monitoring how much each person is speaking, and it's actually a really good indicator about whether the meeting is productive. If your revenue manager is speaking 75 or 80% of the conversation, you should really start raising the flag as to whether this should be just a monologue conversation with the GM. And now I'm starting to put these soft KPI for revenue leaders to speak less in their revenue management and their revenue meetings. So about 30%, 25% is kind of the goal, so that they can ask more question, they get more interaction, they get more contribution from others, so whether it's marketing or sales or operation. But now using that technology, so whether you're using an AI or using Teams, try to measure how much each individual is speaking is actually a really fun and interesting way to see how the dynamic of your meeting is working. And I think beyond that, from a leadership perspective, is to recognize that we have to let go of control. We cannot know everything. We're, especially now in the digital space, we're not going to know all of the KPIs. We're not going to know all of the tools. And I think there needs to be a recognition that DOSM and commercial directors need to surround themselves by experts, and in some cases, people that are much, much, much younger than ourselves.
Yes.
And we need to let go of that control. We need to trust our people a lot more. And I think for some people, it's still a bit difficult.
Thank you very much. Thanks to all our panelists. what we heard today is clear. Alignment doesn't happen by accident. It takes structure, the right mindset, tools that actually help, and people who know how to collaborate. If your commercial teams are still working in silos, fix it. There's no excuse anymore. Enjoy the rest of the CSC 2025. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much.